welcome back for session two on week two. The last session I thought definitely raised a lot of interesting points and questions. And when we went to the meet the speakers time, I felt there was some really good engagement there. So that's clearly beginning to sort of work quite nicely for many of you out there. And once again, just keep on doing that. So this next session is all about innovation, and we're welcomed by two excellent experts. Ellie Cooney, who I remember meeting off the plane just about 5 years ago from Sydney, and he's done a lot since coming in the UK, and obviously he'll share his background. And then of course Alex Barclay, who's got a ton of experience with HSBC Ventures. But I'll hand over to our moderator, Jeremy Bassett of CoQ, who of course is going to be doing the pitch day as well. So over to you, Jeremy, and have a good session.
Great, thanks, Peter. Yeah, really looking forward to this as we explore how startups and large financial institutions can work together. Bringing David and Goliath together has really been the bedrock of my career. I started this journey at Unilever, actually, where I was a marketing director and started a program called the Unilever Foundry, which was Unilever's platform to work with startups. So I've worked in corporate side, and then for the last 4 years, I've been CEO of CoQ, which is a startup in itself, but helping corporates and startups to collaborate. So I'm really passionate about this space of helping small fintechs work with large financial institutions. I've seen firsthand the massive impact that these partnerships can have, not just in financial services, but right across the FTSE and the Fortune 100. The impact for both the startup and the corporate is phenomenal. And we're going to be diving into that today. And to help do that, I'm, as Peter mentioned, really pleased to be joined by Ali and Alex. If you guys want to join here, and we can kick off with a quick round of introductions. Alex, why don't you kick us off? Give us a little bit of background
Sure.
into your role and what you're doing at.
Sure. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Alex, as Jeremy said, I'm Alex Barclay. I'm the portfolio manager at HSBC Ventures. HSBC Ventures is the venture capital arm of HSBC. We invest in technology companies, strategic technology companies, as part of our innovation vision. My role focuses around helping startups. I often describe it as being the VC cliche of how can I be helpful. So we spend a lot of time on biz dev, kind of company ops. My last role at HSBC before I joined the team, I was a global head of fintech procurement. So I often describe it as being the most hated man in fintech. That my job was to bridge the gap between small agile companies and the Goliath that is HSBC. I spent a long time working with innovation teams, working with new technologies, and trying to find them out, trying to find ways to bring them into the bank. I think I've got a fairly pragmatic view of innovation in big corporates. So looking forward to talking to everyone today.
Brilliant. And Ali.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie Cooney. As Peter mentioned, I'm an Aussie, and I came over several years ago, but my background is very much both sides of the fence. I am an ex-entrepreneur trying to start a business in Sydney, managed to get an exit. I have been in the fintech space for many years. I used to be the head of startup delivery for Aviva, where my role was to work with startups and build that collaboration that Jeremy talked about. I've also very loosely worked with a couple of incubators and Aviva's corporate venture capital arm, Aviva Ventures. And at the moment, I am also the Chief Product Officer for Asto, which is a quasi-startup in Banco Santander, which for those from the other side of the world is one of Europe's largest banking groups.
Great. So obviously when it comes to disruption, big banks, like any large organization, they can build the future, they can buy or invest, and they can partner. It's great that we're covering all three of those elements off here. With Alex, you're obviously leading the invest or buy side of the equation, and Ali, you've been heavily involved in building and partnering. I'm interested though, I mean, if you rewind the clock 5 years, but definitely 10 years, none of the big banks were doing any of this sort of stuff. Why are banks working with startups today, do you think?
I think for us, and I often say, I think it's become a question of talent for us, that by and large, you know, I say this knowing full well that I work at a bank, that rock stars aren't coming to work for us anymore. You know, they're going to tech companies, they're founding their own businesses. And I think, you know, we recognize as a 150-year plus financial services organization that we need to these ideas, we need these new technologies to continue to exist. We don't really have the expertise, the technical knowledge, or really the infrastructure to develop this stuff in-house. Where we have done, or where I think big banks have tried to do that in the past, it's not always been particularly successful. And I think, not to be too dramatic about it, but I think it becomes a question of survival. That if I look at the, you know, the kind of big tech companies out there, the startup, the challenger banks who snap at our heels, that I think we need to be better at partnering. We need to do this stuff to frankly, to stay relevant and stay alive.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's almost your R&D team.
Yeah, look, you know, and I think if you look at the way that new technologies, the speed at which new technologies have entered the market, you know, we are quite a bureaucratic organization, and it takes us, and I'm sure, I don't know about Elliot at Santander, but it takes us a while to do anything. You know, we tend to be quite careful, and we tend to be quite restrained when bringing new stuff into the bank. And I think just the speed at which the world is now changing, technology is changing, we simply can't keep up with it. I think also there's a cost play for us that, you know, with the shift to cloud, running these new applications on data centers, running these new technologies in our on-prem data centers just doesn't work for us anymore. The cost mechanics don't make any sense anymore.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, the big driver for us is the speed of which people can move. You know, if I think about you know, I heard a figure a couple of years ago, I'm not sure if it's still true, but the amount of product releases and updates that Facebook do on a daily basis, you know, the speed at which we can deploy our updates is really slow. And people are coming to expect that level of customer engagement, those new features with the pieces of technology on a kind of weekly, monthly basis, and we can't do that.
Yeah. Interesting. And Ali, from your perspective, what's the motivation here for Santander and other big banks to get involved in working with startups?
So the industry has gone through a massive change in the last decade. You know, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, we had the financial crisis, and what came out of it was just a completely different level of accountability for regulated businesses. Banks, insurance companies, and many of them. With that came a level of risk aversion that got dialed up to an unheard of level. And so, to Alex's point, a lot of the stuff banks would like to do, they can't do very well because, and I say banks, regulated financial services businesses in the broader term. And that makes it very tough to do this stuff inside an organization. And that creates a huge opportunity for really good fintechs that can, large organizations can effectively outsource this innovation to, and then bring in once it's at a level of maturity that meets risk parameters, so to speak.
That's interesting. Yeah. And that's a really interesting perspective, because I can see that, you know, the banks are almost this safe, secure, highly regulated chassis that the innovation at the right time can plug into. And that's also, I guess, a glimpse into the future. This is not something that's just a recent trend, but it's probably something that's going to be a long-term play. I'm interested, so if that's sort of the why, what's the how behind this? How are startups and large financial institutions working together?
Do you want to go first, Ellie?
Yes, so sure. So it's a really, it's a tough one to generalize. You know, there's investment, there's partnerships, occasionally there's acquisitions as well, but it really depends. It depends on the situation and the scenario and the use case. You know, using them as a supplier tends to be the most straightforward and direct approach. And from a startup or a fintech's perspective, there could be a lot of really interesting potential with building deeper relationships with large financial institutions. I think as a fintech, you have to weigh the pros and cons of the different types of relationships. But from my observations, just straight out supplier relationship tends to be the most common.
It's an easy place to start, isn't it? But Alex, I guess obviously you're going a step deeper there with investments and potentially acquisitions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the way, I mean, certainly when I started doing this 3 years ago, HSBC 3 years ago, that Ellie's right, that the way that we were engaging was really straightforward, and that we were just simply buying or licensing software from people. And it was very kind of, when I started, our way of engaging with fintech was very immature. As that's gone on, those kind of deeper partnerships that Ellie's talked about have evolved, and those have involved acquisitions or investments. So my team is specifically involved in investing in companies that we want to we want to take a stake of. They've become strategic. They've become really important to delivery of some of our services. We own a considerable portion of an open banking play who deliver open banking services into our digital apps in the UK. That was really that investment was really driven by the desire that this was going to become a key part of our infrastructure, and we wanted, frankly, to be able to see what was going on. We wanted to have a kind of to be able to direct the roadmap. We wanted more involvement in the company. I think as those of that, I guess, was the second stage of the kind of partnerships. What we're starting to see now is a different kind of like dual selling services. So for us, we resell, maybe more pinned at, larger technology companies, but we partner with the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, to either resell products or launch new products together. And I think you're starting to see some of these kind of things. Okay, it's an acquisition, but the acquisition of Stripe, where they want to build kind of deeper partnerships with people. We're starting to do those same sort of things, selling products, white labeling stuff. And that's at a very early stage for us. I don't know what it's like at Santander, but we are still trying to find mechanisms of which to do that, contractual mechanisms, be that a JV, be it a consortia. I don't think we've kind of touched on consortia, because that's another way that we've seen we've seen some of this kind of stuff come into the bank. So for us, trade finance is a big part of our business, and we've partnered with lots of other banks to develop technology between us using fintech. So we invest we're involved in a platform called We.Trade, which is a GTRF trade finance platform, and which we as an organization saw a need, a group of banks saw a need, and developed something. So I think it's changing, and I think they're getting more and more interesting. When I started out doing this, it was fairly dull, but there's now more, and like I said, there's people doing more and more interesting things in this space.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And one of the things we talk about at CoCubed is how supplier sort of agreements are a great place to start. It's sort of like dating, and then equity is a bit more like marriage, if you like, where things start to get a bit more serious. And so I guess for startups, it's good that you've got that spectrum to go down as well. I'm interested though, in terms of the benefits, what are the benefits that the big banks are looking for from this? You've talked about access to innovation, but does it go beyond that?
I think there's a few reasons for it for us. I mean, one obviously is using technologies that we couldn't have developed ourselves. I think that's fairly self-evident. I think the other for us, it's more cultural than anything else. So, giving people access to ways of working maybe they've not experienced before. So if you've been you're a developer, you're an exec in the bank, you maybe haven't had experience to dealing and working the ways that these startups do. I remember going out to a startup once, my first kind of couple of years of working, first year of working in the bank, and walking into the room, and you could see who was from HSBC and who was from the startup. Everybody from the bank was in suits and ties, and everyone from the startup was in a check shirt and jeans. And I say it's cosmetic, but that change of that, that agility, that speed of working that we sometimes lack, bringing people in and being able to expose them to that has enabled us to bring those processes back into the bank. We're looking at running a program of giving secondments of people into the bank into our portfolio companies so they can build up some of this experience. And I would say, I think that's a two-way street as well. I think that, certainly in my experience, fintechs can learn things from us. The rigor, the diligence that we potentially have within our organization, they can benefit from that too. So I don't think it's just a one-way street with that. And I think lastly, there's an element of, we want to be associated with these new technologies. We want to be associated with these things because it benefits us as a brand, for us. And I'm sure the same is true of Santander, that, if we're working with innovative companies, that probably helps our balance sheet as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Investors want to see you ahead of the game.
Absolutely.
Ali, what would you add to that?
So I'd say that the benefits are, and again, this is sort of generic from any large org. The ability to do things quickly is something that is not associated with financial services. whereas a fintech can do that. And to Alex's point around culture, I see too much, and I kind of I've done a little bit of consulting as well around this, but I see too many financial institutions thinking about technologies as projects as opposed to products. These very nuanced, subtle things where it's native in the fintech world, but completely alien in large financial services organizations with legacy and history. These things all manifest in an ability to deliver value in a fintech that, for the same investment in time and cost, a financial services firm would just laugh. They'd spend that much money just putting together the paperwork for their first meeting. So the benefits are cultural, they're definitely financial, and they're definitely time-bound as well. And that's on top of the risk benefits, where they're sort of distancing themselves from the risk until something is mature enough that it's worth sort of bringing that overhead in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was talking to the COO of ING Bank probably about 5 years ago now, and they just implemented Agile in Netherlands, ING Bank. And it was phenomenal, the impact that had culturally. This idea of moving from project to product, I think is quite pertinent. They were able to enhance customer satisfaction significantly and reduce their workforce from 18,000 down to 9,000. It's basically a half in the workforce. It's phenomenal.
These organizations have such a long way to go. This for me is what gets. If I was a fintech entrepreneur with a startup that looked like it was getting a bit of traction or growing, or the sparks of success, I look at the UK and I think, wow, this place is like a new gold rush.
Yeah. Especially when you start to think about, the vision you mentioned of highly regulated institutions and then plugging into the latest innovation at the right time. I think it's the start of a whole new way of working for the industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
So obviously, Alex, at HSBC, you've got ventures, and then Ali at Santander, you've got different programs as well. How do you suggest startups engage with the bank? Like, how do they connect?
I think for me, the big issue that I have and I've experienced over the last few years is people just kind of pitching to us blind. That,
right.
I mean, I don't buy technology anymore, but my inbox, my LinkedIn accounts are full of people trying to sell things to me. And it really doesn't land, that you're trying to sell to people who will be dealing with, I think HSBC as an organization sends a lot of email, but people are trying to clear 400 or 500 emails a day. They just don't have time to respond to that. And I think the people I've seen be really successful have come in with a clear idea of the problem that they're trying to solve. We have, and I heard our global CIO say this 2 years ago, that we have $110 million problems in the bank. If you have a solution to that problem, we will bite your hand off to get you into the bank. We will move heaven and earth to do it, because for him, it was a P&L issue, and that he was hemorrhaging money, and he was responsible to our board of directors to fix that. I think that also gives you the key exec sponsor. I think that's the most important bit of advice I'd give to anybody trying to sell to a bank, is have somebody who is going to fight your corner and who's responsible for delivering this service. That could be somebody in a business line, that could be somebody in IT, but somebody senior enough to get things moving if it gets stuck, but also junior enough to be in the detail. Trying to pitching to CEOs, mostly in my experience, is a waste of time, especially in big banks, because they are too high level. They've got the 30,000-foot view. They love taking meetings and drinking coffee, but what they don't, they'll pass it to somebody down the chain who's just swamped trying to keep their head above the water. Especially for us in this kind of post-COVID landscape, that we're just trying to keep the lights on. That they're trying to do new things at the moment is probably not on most people's radar, unless you have something that's going to really that will solve these kind of $10 million problems that we talked about. The other bit of advice, the other thing that I would say is be prepared for it to be a long sales cycle. That, on average, I usually tell people it's 12 to 18 months, really, from your kind of first point of engagement to actually getting something started. And don't expect them really to to kind of jump off the ground. Your meeting, first couple of meetings, probably nothing will come of them, and you might bounce around the bank a little bit. So yeah, look, it is difficult. I think Ellie kind of said it earlier. We are still pretty difficult, pretty slow to do things, but there is certainly is opportunity there.
Yeah, that's such good advice, because I mean, when you see these big shiny logos and massive opportunities, I mean, there are massive opportunities, but anything massive takes time generally, doesn't it?
It does. And I think, there's no shortage, frankly, of people, not just in banks, but in big organizations who want to waste your time, and as a startup founder, I think time is probably the most precious commodity that you have, time and resource. I guess the thing that I used to see most, and the most kind of immaturity in startups, was not knowing the amount of time and effort it was going to take to get a contract with us. I think if you come in with your eyes open, know that you're probably going to need a dedicated salesperson for this, know that it's going to take 12 to 18 months, you're probably going to be okay. But it is difficult to do.
Yeah. And Ali, what's your perspective here in terms of how do you suggest startups engage?
So I agree. Cold calling on LinkedIn is not effective. If anything, it can devalue your company or your brand, because you may be bucketed mentally into another one of these. The great way, the most effective way to get in, and it's not easy, is to have someone that understands you, who has influence to open those doors and give you the attention and the headspace that you need to demonstrate your proposition. And that can be really tough, because even within an organization, you'll have your sponsor, but the sponsor has dependencies on 4 other stakeholders, of which really this is not on their radar at all, and that sponsor is having to drag them, kicking and screaming over the line. So even if you have a sponsor or someone you've engaged with in a large organization, it doesn't mean you're over the line. It means you have someone doing the legwork for you on the other side. You're going to have to deal with the legal teams and compliance teams and risk teams and procurement teams, and then you're going to have technology reviews. And this is where, to Alex's point, this could be a 12-month journey. As a startup, I would say 2 things. One is, make sure you are a painkiller, not a vitamin, right? Because right now in financial services organizations, especially with COVID, the thing that will get attention is painkillers. And so for that, I mean, you're solving a really burning problem for these organizations, as opposed to giving them a nice to have. If you can do that, then you have a much higher chance of getting attention.
Yeah.
I would also say, if you don't have a 12-month runway at least, if not maybe a 24 or 36, I'd be mindful of the way I would engage with these financial services companies, because part of their DD, they may say, oh, look, you may not be around in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, and the conversation just stops. But this is obviously, it's different if you're looking at them as an investor or as a partner where they could actually support you. But if you're trying to come in as a supplier, then that becomes a really big hurdle. So it's really tough. But if you can find someone that has enough gravitas that can get things over the line, and work with them over the months to make this happen, then you could be onto a really big thing and a really terrific thing. But you've got to make that happen. Now, the upside of that is these organizations are relatively price insensitive, because the kind of scales and prices and fees of these fintechs, compared to the opportunity cost of not solving the problems for these organizations, is on 2 different scales. But so is the time to market and the speed and the mentality, right? You'll have a meeting in a startup, you'll make a decision, and then the next day you're moving on to the next action. That 24-hour cycle could take a month in a financial services firm. So you're going to have to balance those frustrations out, balance the longevity of the engagement and stick with it. But only really engage if you have if you have a meaningful way in, and you have the stamina to stick with it.
Yeah.
There was one thing, sorry, Jeremy, there's one thing I just kind of prompted by something that Ellie said, actually, I think is probably worth mentioning, is that around, things around DD and runways and, kind of viability, I think if there are things that you want and you need a part of the process, don't be frightened to ask for them. When I started doing this, that, Ellie's right, is that we would probably not have engaged with people who we didn't perceive as being financially viable. I mean, that consisted of running like a credit score on somebody. I mean, it wasn't particularly scientific. And actually sort of saying, look, I need payment terms are always a big thing, but get it out on the table early. And actually, if you are, it is difficult to be honest with us and open with us. That I think there's a big fear, certainly when people were dealing with us, that we would somehow, going to steal their lunch, that we were frankly, we were going to screw them over. I often say we're just not that smart. We're like, we genuinely, there's not this kind of big evil brain moving in the background. And actually we're more, if we know, and we can do these more interesting things. I remember somebody saying a few years ago that we couldn't, they weren't able to kind of make payment terms. They couldn't make 90-day payment terms. We're going to walk away. And I said, okay, we'll pay you straight away, or we'll pay you up front. But if we don't know, we can't kind of help out with those things. And I think, if one thing that people take away from this is that there needs to be more transparency between us and smaller organizations, because it's how we're going to do business together in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to come back to one of those points, but before I do, just a quick shout out to the group. Please do feel free to send in any questions you might have for Ali or Alex, and we'll get to those. I've got a few more questions here as well, but if you've got your own specific questions, we can jump into that. And of course, there's Meet the Speaker sessions right after this as well. Obviously, the companies that are joining us today are mostly abroad. They don't have much of a presence in the UK, let alone a sponsor at a big bank or someone that can sort of understand them and champion them. How would you suggest they even get going in going abroad or moving into the UK?
I think for HSBC, we're lucky that I think, we're the world's local bank, to coin a bad phrase of ours a few years ago. But, we have opportunity across the globe. We have strong presence in Asia. Australia is a big market for us, US. I think you'll find certainly a lot of big banks are global organizations, and there are people to reach out to, that there are people to kind of make those contacts with at conferences, LinkedIn, I know I've just panned it, but there are ways to do that. But I think understanding, I think I said it earlier, understanding who to engage with, understanding who owns that problem. And it doesn't matter if you're in Asia, we really are truly global. We have Singapore, we have a portfolio company in Singapore supporting e-commerce transactions in the US, so we can make that work, and we really do see the world globally.
Yeah, cool. That's good advice.
I would try and find someone to engage with meaningfully, and so that's someone who is not so senior that they don't have the time of day to work with you, but not so junior that they can't do anything with it. And this is where the months come in, because you may find someone who's like, actually, I get the problem, and go for approach people that have to deal with the problem every day, because when they see the value of what you're offering, they can become advocates because it impacts them directly, and then they can find the right person within the organization. So if you're going to approach people, and I say this all from a supplier perspective, it kind of obviously changes if it's an investor or partner situation. Find the people whose day-to-day lives your startup will help.
Yeah.
And find the right level of seniority, and show them how you're going to make their lives easier, and work with them so that they can find the right person. It may be 1 or 2 degrees of separation away, but you might find that next person in a month or two. The other thing I would say is never underestimate the credibility of any other customers you have, even if they're from other countries. If you have some brand names, back home that you're working with, that stuff is really powerful to build you some street cred as well. So that's another really, really good option to get in with businesses. But excuse my language, get rid of the BS, right? You know, you'll have a pitch and the first 10 minutes is stuff like, yeah, I've heard it all the time. Yeah, I get it. All right. And then I've heard this and then I've heard this. All that stuff, you have someone's head for minutes at a time. And if you fill the first 50, 60% of that with a warm up and with an intro, and by the time you've got this person's, they're fatigued and they're on to the next thing, right? And I can pretty much guarantee you, when you're speaking to the right people, nothing you're pitching is going to be a complete revelation. It's going to be something they've thought about, something they'd love to do but don't know how. So they're going to see it and think, wow, this is what I've always been after, as opposed to, wow, I never knew this was really a thing. And so focus on be focused, be to the point. If you have numbers, show numbers, you know, we saved this client, you know, this client's costs in this space reduced 40%, or the SLA in this went down 50%. You know, it took us X months to implement. You know, really crunchy numbers gets people attention, because as we said earlier, we get pummeled with this stuff consistently. And it's like spam in your box, you know, you don't know what's legit and what's not. And you just put it to the side because you're dealing with other fires right now. So concise, punchy metrics, painkillers, engage with the right stakeholder where you're, who is going to appreciate you solving their problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, that is great advice for pitch day, which is coming up next week. So please do take that advice from Ellie on board. Cut the BS, get straight to the point, talk to the problem. We don't really care about the team or a whole bunch of other things that are not really that pertinent to the issue. Show the issue up front and then get onto everything else later.
Jeremy, there was one thing, sorry, just again prompted by Ellie. The other thing, that a bit of advice I would give is work your network. You know, that could be, you know, your investors, you know, your bankers, you know, your other clients. You know, you know, a lot of the work that we do, especially as investors, comes through intros and referrals from other people. Banks, you know, are great ways to do that. That, you know, other clients, get them to introduce you to. Fintech's a relatively small world. And actually, especially in big financial services institutions, most people have worked together or know of their counterparts in other banks. If there's things that you can do to work that network, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, good advice. I know when I was doing my MBA, they always said your first degree connections are not much use for you except for connecting you to someone else. It's the second degree that is the power.
Absolutely.
And a warm introduction is far better than anything else you could hope for. So yeah, work your network. I like that, Alex. All right, you guys have been working in this space for a while. What are the big mistakes you've seen? I always think like success is a lousy teacher, but mistakes teach us everything. What mistakes do you see fintechs making here?
I think there's an element. I think for me, the big things that I've seen go wrong is trying to drink the ocean. Is that people coming in and trying to pitch like global solutions to, you know, when they haven't, you know, they really only scale to do one thing. You know, if there's a use case, start small and build on it. You know, if you can get your foot in the door and really nail that, you know, I think as Ellie said earlier, there's a huge opportunity across the bank. Once you're in, I think you're pretty much set. It's very difficult to dislodge you from that position. I think the second thing is not being transparent. If you can't do something, say it. You know, if it's too much, don't run off in the corner and try and do it yourself. Talk to us about it. And I think lastly, I think there's an element of pragmatism that everybody needs to bring to the table with this kind of stuff, is that there are some things that we as organizations that you might think we should accept, but we're not going to, you know, and that I think you kind of occasionally just need to kind of get on with it. You know, and that's difficult for me to say, you know, I don't really want to feel like anybody's being bullied into something, but equally there are some positions I think about more about contract negotiations here, but there are things that you just kind of have to suck up, you know. And yeah, once you're in, it really is a great opportunity to move elsewhere and to scale what you have.
Yeah. So maybe take a hit on the first opportunity and play the long game.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing knowing that you're already working with a competitor or a peer organization. It's amazing the level of attention or headspace that gives you in peer organizations. So if you can land your first big whale, it makes it far easier to grab others. But be really focused. Don't be generic, right? The number of decks, the number of pieces of collateral and material where it's like you've got to get to the fourth slide, fifth slide before you're actually getting to the meat. That stuff dissipates. I can't stress that enough. The bit that I think is really also, you've got to think about long and hard. Is this the path you want to take? And you don't want to start engaging by accident or opportunistically, because it'll drain your resources and your time and your headspace. If you want to do this, you want to do it intentionally, you want to do it overtly. It's something you're signing up to try, because it's a little mini project in itself, trying to win over one of these large organizations. Go with their agreements. Don't worry. I know you'll have your own templates, but trust me, these financial services firms will have their own. They still work as if they're dealing with large multi-million pound enterprises. They will engage with you the way they'll engage with Microsoft or Google, right? With enterprise account managers and so on. They're still figuring out how to engage in the SaaS mentality. You want to put a credit card down, £500 a month. That is a really tough thing to do right now in financial services firms. So just be prepared and be up for the challenge of engaging as if you were a Microsoft in terms of the level of detail and customization and those bits and pieces around legals and agreements and DD. But as Alex said, once you're in, it's all worth it, right? Because any alternative has to go through the same thing. So the supplier changes aren't very liquid because of the traction and the friction around that. So it's a double, two sides of the same coin, right? It may be really tough getting in, but once you are in, you can enjoy those benefits.
Yeah. Good advice. There's a question that's come through for you, Alex. From Bruce, of course, from Australia. Do you guys ever play that drinking game, Bruce and Kylie? Anyway, so Bruce has got a company, 4 years old. They've got 20 use cases that they could be deployed across HSBC. If they were engaging with the ventures team, would they engage with start with the solution or the investment opportunity?
Hey, Bruce, definitely the solution. So the way that we would work, I think, is we would probably, definitely with the solution, start pitching that, but also we'll get involved in it from an investment perspective. We think it's really interesting. And I think we used to operate, actually, the team that we wouldn't make an investment until we had a contract with somebody. That's changed now, but it really informs to us, how viable the solution is if people can get their foot in the front door with us. I think, it gives you that internal advocacy for the investment as well. So, the way the process works for us is that we have an investment committee that consists of all of our global CEOs. We then need to take this investment and pitch it to them. And it's easy for us to then say, look, this is a really strong use case. They've got it in the door. It's gone, live, X many customers. That's a much easier sell than going in and say, hey, we met these guys. We think they're a really good investment, but they haven't proved themselves, especially when they're small. The solution, I appreciate it's probably not the easiest thing. We also, as an investor, take ages to do an investment. So we're not, issuing term sheets within 48 hours like some big VCs are. Usually is a 12-month process as well. So definitely a solution first.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think that's consistent across pretty much every corporate venture fund as well, in terms of they're generally investing for strategic reasons, often for financial gain, but always for strategic reasons.
I think the same is probably true of big investors, big fintech investors generally, that, and I've said this a couple of times, we're not that smart. I think people will look at what big banks are doing, have people kind of taking this technology on board. I think as an investment thesis, looking at what other banks are doing, we have the same problems, and if a solution fits at HSBC, it's probably true that it would fit at Santander, it would fit at JP, it would fit at Goldman, at most banks. They tend to be the same people just doing the circuit between them anyway. So I think, as an investor, actually seeing that somebody has traction, they know how, big VCs know how difficult it is to get into banks, and having seen that somebody has the grit and determination to get into a bank, I think is a massive sell. So I think if you can get that one foot in the door, it really is massive. It really is a golden opportunity.
Nice. Before we wrap up, I'm interested, examples. What are examples? Share an example, maybe one each or whatever you prefer to share, of a startup that's worked with you or with another big bank. How's it worked? Why has it been successful?
So I'm really biased. So I'm going to pick one of my portfolio companies, a company called Contexa, who are a financial crime risk company. We invested in them. So it started really early on. We had a very small use case with them. We worked on it alongside, I think they originally came to us through a consultancy, EY. Very small scale, and it now has scaled out across the bank. They've just finished, I think they raised their last Series D at a really significant valuation. It's a great investment story for us. We have a number of senior members of HSBC's board now sit on their board. It's the one example that we use to say how collaboration works really, really well. They've managed to scale that opportunity into most other big banks. It's really been a fantastic opportunity for us. And actually, I think as an example of where, the understanding of the corporate landscape, their founders all came from consultancies or from big banks. They really understood how to get things done in banks. And yeah, it's just been fantastic for us, I think, all around.
Nice. What was that company, Alex?
Quantexa, Quantexa. It's quite difficult to spell. Obviously, weren't thinking about that SEO when they founded it.
Yeah, exactly. And Ali, any examples you'd point to?
So none from my immediate roles perspective, but just generally in the industry, perfect examples of what we mean by focus getting traction. So things like on Fido, which is a ID company, they just do one thing and they do it really well. They figure they verify your ID, that you are who you are, right? Another company, again, they do one thing, do it really well. TrueLayer, connecting to banks through open bankings is a pain in the backside. They abstract that from you, and you just connect to them, and they'll connect into everyone around the world. So they're really good examples of smaller companies that have done really well and gone big by solving one specific problem that's a pain in the backside for financial services companies, and doing it well and doing it again and again and again.
Yeah, nice. That's a great example and a great tip as well. It's easy as a startup, isn't it, to jump from one opportunity to the next with every meeting you have with someone at Santander or HSBC. They've all got loads of ideas and you leave there thinking, oh, we should just do that. But having focus is sometimes the best way to win the game. Guys, why don't we wrap up with your top tips for these companies, and then we'll head into meet the speaker. Ali, do you want to go first just because you're on my screen?
So what I would say is you're all obviously, you've got grit and tenacity, or you wouldn't be in this call. You wouldn't have done what you've done with your startups. You're going to need that to work with these companies, but the size of the prize is worth it, right? Stick with it. Go in with your eyes wide open, and understand what you're getting yourself into. You are chasing a whale, and sometimes the sea gets rocky, but the victory will be worth it if you land the whale. So the UK is huge. HSBC is a Chinese bank. Santander is a Spanish bank. The listings are on the FTSE, right? The UK is a global hub for fintech, for financial services, for finance in general. The opportunity here is terrific, but you've got to stick it out. You've got to be really focused, and you've got to have the tenacity, grit, and determination to come out the other end. And if you do, the rewards will be huge.
Nice. Amazing.
So I think I'm going to steal Ellie's be a painkiller, not a vitamin. I really like that. I'm going to definitely steal that. But I think it's true. Understand what pain point you're solving for us. Transparency. Be honest with us. We'll be honest with you. And I say don't be scared, but we really aren't trying to screw you. I think being honest as you can is really helpful. And I think, as Ellie said, just keep trying with it. Keep plugging. We want these technologies and we need these technologies. We might not show it, but it definitely is something that we need to do as organizations.
Great advice. So let me also pick up on some of the key takeaways that you guys have mentioned through this. So I think the overarching thing is, I love the analogy of this is chasing a whale. Be prepared for this 12 to 18 month journey. Make sure you got the runway. Take the companies on a journey as well. I think it's great advice. You know, you might start with a champion and end up, or someone that's willing to at least introduce you, and end up with board members and everything else like contacts are. But you need to take them on a journey to get there. The whole don't undersell, the price elasticity. I think, you know, it points to this great opportunity. You mentioned that, Alex, as well. Showing the numbers, the results. I think especially in this world of painkillers, not vitamins, people want immediate results. People and numbers help to show those immediate results. So do talk about the savings that you can bring to these companies as well. Work your network, great advice there as well, but be flexible. It's something that we've seen a lot in terms of agreements and stuff. It's far easier to sign off on their 200-page document than to get their legal team to look through your 2-page document. So sometimes it's a matter of just being flexible and sucking it up, as you said as well. And then playing the long game here. It is a long game, but it's a game worth playing. So thank you, Ali. Thank you, Alex. Great advice. We've now got time for everyone else to jump into the breakout rooms where you can meet the speakers. So Peter, do you want to talk about how that's going to happen?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and Alex and Ellie. Another fascinating session, and you know, some top tips that you should definitely listen to. And of course, before meeting up with Alex or Ellie, or both of them, because you can go into both rooms. Just want to remind you. I mean, every speaker is very happy to be connected on LinkedIn. You know, that's a given. But I think in terms of reaching out to them directly, you know, all I'd ask is speak to us first, because some of them are very, very busy people, and we're here to help that happen. We can't promise anything, of course, because it depends upon the situation. But just work with Newfound, you know, sort of during and after the program, and we can obviously support whatever actions are possible. So before we head to the speaker rooms, just a reminder about tomorrow, which I think is really pertinent here. The first masterclass is all about research. And one thing we do know, I know without question, companies don't do enough research or enough validation. We've got a masterclass from one of the best. I mean, Chris from Savanta. Savanta is our partner firm who works with us very closely on helping companies validate the marketplace and making sure they get the details, whether it's who you have to speak to, you know, who your competitors are, look at the market sizing, all the stuff you really need to sort of nail rather than turn up and learn the hard way. So that's the first session. Second session, which is equally important, is, you know, how do you make sure your brand or your marketing is positioned for the UK? And too many companies turn up with the website completely wrong, you know, with wrong language, wrong telephone numbers, etc., etc. That's just the basics, but there's plenty of other things that you'll learn from the Edelman-led masterclass with Geraldine. So I'll let you go. Of course, the Newfound team will be online after Meet the Speakers for 15 minutes if you want to have a quick catch-up. Otherwise, have a very good rest of your days, wherever it may be, and please go meet the speakers. Thanks very much.